Hey, welcome to the Podpage January Meetup. I'm Dave Jackson, head of podcasting here at Podpage. And before we jump into how to get great audio out of guests, a couple quick updates. If you haven't tried it yet, people are loving the audience survey that came out in Podpage. Go to Connect and you'll see there's audience surveys there. People are getting great information. They're getting great feedback, and it's making their shows better. Check it out. We also introduced Podroll. This is a podcasting 2.0 spec, so not all media hosts will have this. But what's so cool about it, these could be your shows. If you're on a network, it could be the network shows. It could be just your friends that you want to kind of cross-promote, and you simply go into your media host and you set up these favorite shows. And then when you save that, you can go into Podpage and it will pull that information in. And if you want, you can make a page that spotlights these other shows. And again, that's called Podroll. Also, it's not so much a feature as somebody gave us some feedback. And it used to be that if you promoted something on social and it pointed at a link, and later you changed the link of your episode, it would break that social link. No more broken social links. That has been resolved. And so we're going to get into, again, how to get great audio out of your guest. Before we do that, I do want to mention our YouTube channel. If you haven't been there yet, lots of videos like this one and a lot of videos. If you're like, wait, Podroll, there's a video on that. So check it out at YouTube. But let's get into it. How to get great audio from your guests. So where are we going with this? We're going to talk about alternatives. We're going to talk about setting expectations. That is key, as well as something I call leaving the door open. And then last, because we're a bunch of nerds, we'll talk about tech toys. So first things first, let's talk about alternatives. And a lot of people kind of don't know this is an option. And what I mean by that is you don't have to have guests. Yeah, people are like, wait, what? And it's true. If you think about it, if a guest cancels, here's what I always say. When you do a solo show, you grow your influence and you simply talk to one person. None of this, hey guys, stuff. Talk to that one invisible person across the desk from you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. So when you do a solo show, you grow your influence. When you do an interview show, you grow your network. And I always say it's not either or, it's both. It's your show. We'll talk about that today, but it is your show. And so, if somebody cancels at the last minute, consider doing a solo show. Now, something else as we move on, setting expectations. I truly believe that this is the main culprit when it comes to why do guests sound bad. And so I think part of this starts with going back to the pandemic and Zoom, and people think they're on a Zoom call. And a Zoom call, if you think about it, the key to a Zoom call is to have audio that is good enough for the people on the call. And we just need to hear each other and be able to understand us. That is a Zoom call, but this isn't a Zoom call. We might be using Zoom, but this is a podcast. And that conversation is, number one, probably going to be edited, and the audio quality is now going to a global audience. And it's meant for other people to hear it. So we want it to sound great. We want to make our guests sound smart. And there's a difference between just a Zoom call and a podcast. And this isn't hard to do. You don't have to spend millions of dollars, thousands of dollars on a studio. And so the first easy trick is to simply avoid hard surfaces. Things like put down carpet on hardwood floors or curtains. Right now in my office, when I first moved in here, there was no carpet. I have a big window here and a big window over there, and I put thick curtains to do two things. Number one, they block out the sun because I'm doing video here. And number two, they kind of block out some of the sound that comes out. I have one of those neighbors that mows his lawn every time I press record. That's just the way it is. And so carpet, rugs, curtains, and bookcases are really handy because the way they are, all the books are different shapes, and so the sound bounces in different directions. So these are really easy things you can do to help your room that you're in. And then I call this the 3-finger width rule. And what I mean by that is even right now, as I'm doing this, because I'm doing a bunch of things over here, I'm not really 3 fingers away. And so if I move closer, you'll notice that A, I don't have to turn up the microphone as loud because my voice is closer. And the fact that because I'm not cranking the microphone, it's not going to pick up as much room noise. But I could, if I wanted to, move this mic away and I could talk louder and you can still hear me. But this is kind of like sitting in the room with someone where if it's here, now I'm in your head. So you'll also notice that I would move this up a little bit so it's pointing at my mouth, but I'm pointing it at the corner of my mouth. And the reason for that, take your hand and put it up in front of you and say, "Happy birthday, please bring pizza pronto." Thank you, Andrew Scott. That's his saying. And you'll notice when you say peas, there's a lot of wind that comes out when you say peanut butter. And when that sound goes into the microphone, it sounds bad. You want some sort of windscreen. This particular microphone is a Rode Podmic USB. And you notice when I said Podmic, even though it has a windscreen, and inside the windscreen is a windscreen. So if I came here and said Rode Podmic and said, "Please bring pizza pronto," you can hear those P's they don't make good noise when they go into the microphone. So you want to have it close, but you also want to pay attention to where your mouth is. And so I always kind of talk across it so that the wind isn't going directly into the microphone, which creates what people call them plosives. Sometimes they call them popping P's, things like that. And so if we're talking bad audio, we've got to bring up our good friend, the Blue Yeti. I've got one sitting right here. And when you get this, it comes with a stand, right? This thing right here. So it looks like, I'll just put that here, just like that. And is that 3 fingers away from my mouth? No, it's not. And what happens is if we go back to this, I have a screenshot here on the right. You'll see where there are all these settings. Those are on the back of the microphone here. And you want the one that kind of looks like an upside down heart, maybe a kidney. That means it only picks up from the front. But so many people, they buy this microphone. Why? Because it's at Best Buy. It's easy to find. And they'll go, I'll just set it to pick up in every direction. That's one of those settings. And I'll set it between us. Pretend you're Oprah. You get a microphone. You get a microphone. You get a microphone. And the other thing they'll do is because it sits like this, people will talk into it like this. I'm just going to talk into the top of it. Well, that's not the way this microphone works. It's actually what they call a side address microphone. And so you'll see here in the screen that I have that there is a stand. And so you could have it on the stand and have it right here, right? And you're like, that would be a great thing. And I'll set it to only pick up in the front and everything is good. It's a USB microphone. That's why people like it, because you can plug it directly in, but it's $130 and that's without the stand. And I'm like, there are just better options that are only made to pick up right in front. And so I do see a lot of people doing this with a Blue Yeti where they're talking into the top and you want to talk into the side, right into the blue logo. And so an alternative to this are these, the Samson Q2U and the Audio Technica. The beauty of both these microphones is they're under $100 and they plug directly into your computer. Now they do have the ability with this little round thing here. You can plug those into an interface like a Focusrite, or right now I'm using a Rodecaster Duo or a Zoom PodTrack P4. You could plug them in here if you're doing a show with someone else in the room with you. If you're just going solo, you can plug them directly in to your computer via USB. So it's literally plug and play, and they sound amazing. Now, this Rode PodMic goes for about $200. These go for around $70. I've got a microphone behind me. The Shure SM7B was $400. And people are like, well, why aren't you using that one? Because I like the sound of my mouth, the sound of my mouth. Yeah, the sound of my voice on this one. And so that's why I use this microphone. So people are like, well, why would you switch microphones? Because number one, they're not going to grow your audience unless your audio is absolutely hideous. But sometimes people switch microphones just because they like their voice on that microphone. So keep that in mind. There are these cheap alternatives. And so if a host comes on and they're using their built-in laptop microphone, which isn't great, and it's 3 feet away, it's horrible. And so always explain things in a way that here's how you're going to benefit. Your content is so good. And right now you kind of sound like you're in a cave, and it's going to distract people. Instead of hearing what you're saying, they're going to listen to how it sounds. And your content just deserves to sound great. And you don't have to spend $1 million. Here's a link to a Samson Q2U. It's less than $100. And if you think about it, if this is an author who's trying to do a book tour via podcast, they can write that off as a business expense, and they should want to sound good. That affects their brand. So yes, I'm recommending that if somebody sounds awful, you go, have you ever thought about getting, the Audio-Technica ATR 2100? Or if they have the dreaded Blue Yeti, they need to learn how to use it. So next thing up, leave the door open. So what do I mean by this? Is there are times, in most cases, I get asked, like people pitch themselves to me. Like I don't have to think about it. If I want you to come on my show, I can pitch, and most people never turn down an interview. But I get a lot of people that pitch me that really do not fit my show. They just want anybody with a pulse, and they spam you. But on occasion, I'll give you an example. I just had somebody that wrote a book called The Purpose Code. And it's all about the mental side of kind of getting through life. And I know Doc G, and he said, hey, I think this would be a good fit for the School of Podcasting, which is my show. And I was like, not quite sure. And so this is where you leave the door open. And by that, what I mean is I said, well, I'll interview you, but I reserve the right to not publish it because I'm not sold on it. And if somebody is confident in their material and they've done the research on your audience and they know this is going to resonate, they're not going to mind that you say, hey, I might not publish this. And that's exactly what Doc did. And he came on my show. It absolutely fit my audience. We tied it into podcasting and I published it. But it was up to me. I said, I'm just letting you know. I said, I can interview you. If I don't think it's a good fit, I'll give you the recording. You can use it on your show or however you want to use it. It's just not going to make it to my audience. And you have to remember that in the end, yes, I'll reserve the right. Why? Because you are the goalie. And so if you are a person, you're the goalie, your audience is behind you. They're the net. And so if somebody comes in and says, hey, they got really bad audio, they sound like they're in a tin can or a cave, not on my show. You're the goalie. You knock it out of the way. If somebody comes in with content that's not going to resonate with your audience, not on my show. I'm not going to waste their time. Nope, sorry, get that stuff out of here. No way. And so I'll give you an example of one where I was interviewing somebody and they were in an RV in Arizona. And I could hear their air conditioner. And I said, is there any way to turn that air conditioner off? Because again, I'm the goalie. That air conditioner can't make it to my audience. And she said, I'm in Arizona. It's 110 degrees. I'm not turning off my air conditioner. So what I did was I said, let's just be quiet for about a minute and I will record just the sound of the air conditioner. Now, this was probably 15 years ago, and you might get away with that today. But back then, I recorded the noise. I then told my software, listen to this noise and take it out of this recording. And in the end, she just got a sound of a... Yeah. And so I went ahead and I published it. And I remember as I was getting ready to do it, I was like, do I want to do this? And I went ahead and published it, went to bed, and I woke up to 4 emails of people going, Dave, what was that? And as a goalie, I let it through. And I could have, had said, hey, but the guest didn't, air conditioning microphone, it's all their fault. No. If you're going to take the applause when things go good, you've got to then accept responsibility that you let that bad audio go to your audience. And so here's a thought. Would you rather upset the one person who maybe didn't come prepared to be on your show? Or would you rather upset the people that you've worked so hard to listen to your show? I've been in this situation. It was an awkward conversation. I'm still here. And I told the person, I can't publish that because he told me what he wanted to talk about. And then he just basically promoted his products and services with zero takeaways for my audience. And I went, yeah, I'm not going to publish that. And I asked him, I'm like, would you like to do it again and talk about what you said you were going to talk about? And instead, he pitched me even harder to be a client. So no, that's not making it to my audience. I'm the goalie. I'm going to swat that stuff away. And I feel much better that I didn't upset my audience. Because again, it's your brand that takes the hit, not the guest. It's your brand. You let that through to get to your audience. Now, let's talk about some of the technology that you can use. There are a ton of these. There is Zoom, Squadcast, Riverside, Ecamm. Ecamm, by the way, is only for Mac, Zencaster, StreamYard, and Boomcaster. And so there is a little difference between these. Zoom, we all know, thanks to COVID-19, and it is easy to connect, but Zoom's main purpose is to make sure everyone can hear each other, right? So what it does is it compresses everybody's audio. If you have a not so great internet connection, Zoom will accommodate so that you can connect. Now, it's not going to sound as good, and they call that compression, but you can connect to people. So that's the good news. You can go into Zoom and kind of tweak it and say, give me separate tracks. I'll talk about why separate tracks are great. And I think there's a mode called Musician that will kind of cut down on some of the compression. But Zoom's primary goal is to make sure everyone can hear everybody. Remember, it's a Zoom call. And where all these other ones, the Squadcast, the Riversides, all the other ones here, those do what's called record locally. So what they do is the person's talking, it makes a recording on their hard drive and then uploads it to whatever service you're using. So it sounds great, and this is what it avoids. Have you ever been on like a Zoom call or any kind of internet call, and all of a sudden certain things get cut out? I call this Bugs Bunny on poison. So someone will be right? And if you're using Zoom, what you hear is what you record. With something that's recording locally, right? But the recording that's going to their hard drive and uploaded is going to sound perfect. That's one of the biggest advantages. Now, I mentioned separate tracks. You can get this from Zoom and you can get these from these other ones. This is great in the event that your guest didn't lock up their dog. And all of a sudden you're asking them a question and you hear rough, 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 rough. Well, when you listen to that recording, your question is on track 1 and the dog barking is on track 2. You can mute just track 2 in that section and save the recording. So having separate tracks is a little bit like a spare tire. You don't really need them, but boy, when you need them, you really, really need them. So people are like, great, what's the best one? Well, I always say there kind of isn't a best one. And before we move this, I have to point out, notice that this stock photo has the Blue Yeti pointed wrong. Right? I love stock photo, and I think that's half the reason why people use it wrong. But I just wanted to point that out. But Dave, what's the best one? There kind of isn't one, because you can talk to someone who will tell you that Riverside is the best ever. Somebody else will be like, oh, I hate that thing. And then, so what I like to point out is there is kind of a theme or a curve that goes through. I'll give you an example. I was at Podcast Movement. Good friend of mine said, oh man, Riverside is the jam. And I'm like, great. And then so it's the jam. Everybody loves it. And then somebody will say, but can we get it to do this one thing? And so the developers listen to their audience. They go back, they test it, make it, test it, make it, test it. They finally put it out, and the audience gets creative and they find a way to break it. So you end up with people going, hey, is there any alternative to whatever service? Because it's gone from everybody loves it to everybody hates it. This thing is trash. It's awful. And then the developers, anytime you have a problem with the software, contact the company. They probably want to fix that. And so they will. They'll fix it. It'll come back up and everybody will be back at, I love this thing. I love this thing. And then somebody will say, yeah, but can it do this? And you're back to this and this. And this, so depending on where you join in this scenario, you might be joining one of these companies in the everybody hates it mode. And sometimes if you just wait, they'll turn it around. But my bottom line is pick one and go with it. I always use this, the Zoom PodTrack P4. It's about $150 because it's a recorder and an interface at the same time. So even if I go into Zoom and Zoom records Bugs Bunny on Poison, I've got a recording of it here. Or if something just gets eaten, I was using one service and my guest file was 24 minutes long. My file was 30 seconds. Oops, that's all right. I had a backup. So anytime you can have more than one recording, not a bad idea. So keep that in mind as we go along. Now, what if things have gone horribly wrong and you're like, Dave, I did my homework. I told them don't show up like this, and they did. And it's some, B-list celebrity. I don't want to tell them to go, away. So you can use some tools to clean things up. And so one is Auphonic. Auphonic is AUPHONIC. And it's a .com if you throw that on there. And this is a tool, you get 2 hours a month you can upload, and if you need more, then you pay for it. But this would have been great on my air conditioner problem because it's great at removing background noise. It's great at leveling out sound. So if maybe your guest didn't record loud enough and you're louder than them, it'll level them out. It's a great tool. Another one here is Adobe Enhance. And Adobe has been around for years, and they're stepping deeper into the podcasting pool. And Adobe Enhance is a free tool, a little bit like Auphonic. It'll clean things up, make it sound good. And if you need a little more control, there's a paid version of that. Then two of my favorite plugins, and plugins are kind of like adding air conditioning to a car. You take something and you add to it. So these would work in Audacity, Hindenburg, whatever you're using. And one is Accentize DX Revive Pro. And what this does is it removes hiss, it removes background noise, it removes reverb. So when we talked about having that kind of reverb sound where you sound like you're in a cave, yeah, it takes care of that. And it kind of just smooths things out. Now, it's not cheap. It's $300 for the pro version. But if you're an editor and you do this all the time, the amount of time it will save you is amazing. Now, if you want a cheaper one, they have Accentize D-Room. And all that does is remove that kind of cave sound from your audience. And why that's a big deal is it's fine when you have headphones on, but if you're listening in the car, and again, the difference is it sounds like you're in your head, but with this reverb, it sounds like they're in the room. And now when you have the sound, you're competing with the sound of tires on pavement, it can make it really kind of hard to hear people. So that's why you kind of don't want that little room noise in there. And then the last one is Descript. They have a tool called Studio Sound. Now, Descript is an audio video editor, and they have a built-in tool called Studio Sound that is pretty much worth just, signing up for Descript in general. It's a really amazing tool, a lot like Auphonic, but actually a little better in some ways because you have a little more control. So you can clean things up if you did your best and you still ended up with some not so great sounding audio. You can fix that. Now, one of the things we have under the video here is we said setting expectations with your audience is key. And so all these things like be in a quiet room, lock up your dog, find somebody to watch the kids, be in the quietest room, be in a room if it has carpet and curtains, and avoid hard surfaces, and please wear headphones and use your best microphone. This is all in this sheet that I made. And you can see here where it says things like my audience is made up of audience. So this is where you would say, women aged 35 to 42 or whatever your niche is. And, usually our interview lasts around how many minutes, things like that. You can go to the link under the video and basically go up to File and go make a copy. It's a Google Doc. And once you make the copy, you can edit this to really be customized to your show. Instead of saying, thanks so much for coming on my show, it could be, thanks so much for coming on the blah, blah, blah show. So it's really customizable. How this was made is I went through and typed this up, and then I throw it into my good friend ChatGPT and said, make this better. And hey, it did. And so you can go in and customize this. And when somebody says, hey, I'd love to be on your show, you can send them a link to schedule this, whether it's Calendly or I like TidyCal because it's a one-time fee and then it's yours for life. But whatever you're using to schedule, and you could also attach this and say, please read the prep sheet or whatever you want to call this for our interview, because that way, if they show up and you go, ooh, you don't really have another microphone, it's just this, or you're trying to record this in the car or whatever, you can say, oh, well, I mentioned on my, prep sheet that's not going to work. This is if this was a Zoom meeting, it'd be fine, but this is a podcast. And so either we're going to have to find whatever they have wrong, a better one, or we're going to have to reschedule because, again, not on my show. You don't let that on there. So that, again, will be under the video. And so with that, let's go ahead and take some questions. Any questions on anything, any part of that? Because I realize the fun part of talking podcasting is I can come on and say, here is a thought. And it applies to some people and maybe not to other people and kind of to other people. There's always that it depends. So keep that in mind. But that's why I'm always looking for any ideas or questions. Or I have a question for you guys. Let's go that route. We'll start there because I don't see any in the chat room. What are your thoughts on interviews? Because I've heard rumblings that some people are getting tired of interviews. And I'm like, well, if it's a good interview and it brings value. But I heard somebody say, please, no more. I'm going to tell you about their story. They said, I've heard enough stories to last me a lifetime. And I was like, well, that's an interesting opinion. So if you want to chime in on that, feel free to unmute. And if you have any questions, if you want to raise your hand, you can. There's a little Zeta, go right ahead. She's raising her hand.
I think if somebody's tired of a story, it's not a good story.
Ah, there you go.
I really do. And I do have a question about interviews. It's one of the main reasons I wanted to be on today. And it tied specifically to something you just showed just a moment ago. Up until now, I have had video interviews for a show about writing. It's not my podcast. And then I also have my podcast, which is audio. I've been trying to combine the two on one of the subjects. My problem is all this time, I've had an advisor down at a local television station who has helped me with all of that. And he retired December 31st. So if I want to do video now, it's, I'm totally on my own and I'm not going that route. So I'm going to stick with audio. So I haven't done interviews with people on audio where I've been in charge of all the technical stuff. You just showed a moment ago about how the things that you want to on the list there, the things that the guest needs to be mindful of, and if there's a problem and you're checking the mic, and if the sound is not coming through the mic, then it's like, okay, we have to stop and fix your audio. There have to be like one thing or three things or something that are the most common fixes, because now I'm entering into totally new territory. And like I know with the computer stuff, I have a friend who would always say, are you sure it's plugged in? And and that, are you sure the volume's up? Simple things. Are there some kind of simple things that I should be looking at right off the top if the guest audio is not good?
Yeah, the first one is we're all here in Google Meet. And I always love the fact that they make these buttons really tiny. But if you look at the bottom of the screen, we've got a little picture of a microphone and a little picture of a camera. And right to the left of them, this itty bitty up arrow. And if you click on that, you will see where it'll show you what the computer is currently using for a microphone. And so for me, I'm using a Rodecaster. So it says Rodecaster Duo Chat. But if it said, Logic C90 camera, then you're like, wait, that's why it sounds bad, because you're using the camera's microphone. Or if it says whatever the laptop microphone, there's that. The biggest one usually is, I can take this microphone and I can put it over here and I can talk louder, but can you hear the room noise now? Like you can understand me, but so here it's like you're in the room with me. When I do this, I'm in your head, and it's just a different thing. And
Yes.
so there's that. Plugging it in and unplugging it. I have an Elgato monitor here, this prompter, and when I first bought it, it took me 2 days to get it to work. And what I finally did was I unplugged everything and plugged it back in, and voila, it worked. Rebooting your computer sometimes will help. Depending on where they're at, like people that are on farms out in the middle of nowhere sometimes don't have the bandwidth, and that's where they need to like tell the kids, hey, get off Xbox, quit watching Netflix. Daddy needs the bandwidth, kind of thing. But the big one usually is just they have the wrong mic selected.
Okay, but that leads me then to like a second level question right under that specifically. I don't know a lot about mics. I know the mics that I have.
Yeah.
I don't even know the name of the mic in my computer. And so if a guest is on and I'm checking the little arrow to see the name of the mic they're using.
Well, that's the fun thing. You're checking the mic that you're using. You have to walk them through going. And this is where maybe something we add to the little checklist. And I recommend you do this. If you are lucky enough to have two computers, you can start a meeting on your laptop and then go on your normal computer and join your own meeting, because you need to see what it's like to be the guest. Or if you've got, we used to call them Skype buddies, maybe you've got a Zoom buddy or whatever tool you're going to use. If you're using Riverside, have your friend like, hey, can you join my meeting and take a bunch of screenshots? And really, it might be, if you can find somebody that uses the same thing you do, have them invite you to a meeting. So you really want to know what it looks like from the guest side, because if there is a problem, you have to know, click on this, click on that kind of thing. And it's kind of tricky. That's the tough part, but you kind of have an idea of what the guest is. I know on Google Meet, I have to go, if I want you to share your screen, okay, at the bottom, there's a little hand that looks like this. It's the button right to the left of it. And then I know if they click on that, the best thing to do is click on entire screen and then click on share. But I had to finally do that because we're all familiar with Zoom and I'm not as familiar with Google Meet. So I just had to go into my own meeting to see what is the guest doing so that, I can kind of coach them through that. Does that make sense?
It does, but I still have one more question.
All right.
If the guest is using the computer using the mic on their desktop or their laptop.
Right.
Does it say laptop mic, desktop mic, or local mic? I know what it is on mine.
Yeah, it's probably something like that. Local mic, default mic, something of that nature.
Internal mic.
Internal mic.
Internal, okay.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
All right. Sean, you're next. I know you had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of stories, I don't mind having interviews and stories on calls. The problem is that typically the ones I listen to, they're 2 or 3 hours long in terms of the podcast. And so if I'm really interested in the guest, I'm going to go research them on my own. I don't need that to be on the podcast. The time is valuable. So I'd rather it be a shorter session, with the link to their bio or something, instead of having to waste the podcast time. Let's get into the meat of what the guest wants to talk about. To me, those are the best ones, because that means that the host of the show was honoring, the listener time. And I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. For me, most of the stuff that I edit out is me, because somebody will say something and we are just having a conversation and they'll be like, oh, I did this one thing and this is why we did it. And I'll go, oh man, that totally happened to me. And there was this time. Well, it wasn't like the point they made before was so hard that we had to hear another example. And I'm like, but we're just having a conversation. So I call that, I need a better phrase, but it is me going, hey, me too, I've done that. So I will cut out the me too part and just go back to me asking the next question. So yeah, great insight. Anything else, Sean?
No, that's it. It's just my 2 cents.
Devon?
Devin, sorry.
Thank you, Devin.
So I have a Shure MV7. I wish you could see how far it was away, but I'm in a wheelchair and my table's small, so it has to be.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Or does it seem like I need to move it closer, or?
If you can move it closer, it would be better. What you can do, please tell me I have one on the floor. Yes. You can get, in fact, this is plugged into, let me unplug it. I think this is an MV7. You can get a stand that you can put on your desk and then move it so it's a little closer to your mouth.
So, okay, I have a tripod, so I need one of those desktop. Is it just called a desktop stand?
This is actually, believe it or not, this is for a bass drum mic, but they just call them boom stands. And
Okay.
there are some, so it might be like a desktop boom stand. But if you could just doing what you just did, you sound so much better, because the other one just sounded a little bit like we're back to this, where there's just a little bit of reverb, on your voice.
Okay, so just either get a boom stand or lean forward into
Yeah.
it a little bit more. Okay.
Yeah. Miss Lewis, you are next.
Hi, this is Sophia calling in from London, UK. I actually had some issues with doing a recording. I was using Zoom, and on my side, the internet was perfect, but on the other side, the guest side, it was not perfect.
Yeah.
There was a lot of lagging, and the picture wasn't clear. So I said, you know what? Let's reschedule and let's do another recording. I said, you know what, let me just do some searching online. And then I found out about, because I'm a noob with this, so I found out about StreamYard. So we connected through StreamYard, and the same thing happened. The internet connection on the guest side was so poor. On my side, it was fine. So I wanted some advice about that.
Yeah, I was once interviewed by somebody in Africa, and he said, "Hey, I'm so happy that you're coming on my show." He goes, "I'm just going to tell you, we're going to have to. It will drop the call, and I will just come back. I will ask you whatever question I asked you. I will ask you it again, and we'll just pick up from there." So he would ask me a question, I'd answer about a question, then I'd ask her another one, and then when we get to the third one, he'd drop off. He'd come back on. "So sorry. Here's the question again." But he set expectations. He's like, "I'm in Africa. We have this much bandwidth." And he goes, "This is just the way it's going to be." So it's, there are a couple different ways, because the problem is if you have, a small internet connection, it kind of doesn't matter, because if you're having problems with Zoom, that's a head scratcher, because Zoom is really good. It's just squishing the audio so that it'll fit through any kind of pipe. But if you're on Zoom and they're still dropping a connection, that's where you might want to ask them, "Hey, reboot your computer, close anything like Dropbox or something that's running in the background, so that your computer that's not going to really address your bandwidth, but it does make sure your computer's got as much power to stay connected." And then if they're doing if their kids are playing Netflix or whatever, get those folks off. But the other solution is not great, and it's kind of geeky, and I try to stay away from kind of geeky stuff. But if they can record themselves with like QuickTime or Audacity, they just record their side, and then you call them on the phone. So you connect to each other over the phone. They record locally, which means they have to be able to then go stop, save, export as WAV or whatever it is. And then they have to send it to you probably in Dropbox or Google Drive. See, it's geeky. So it works. Back in the day, they called it a double ender. But if you're talking to someone who's not super technical and you're like, "Oh, just open up Audacity and hit record after you connect your mic," we're already way over people's heads. So it's an option, but it's not the best option. But sometimes if you don't have the internet, that's kind of the only option you have. You might try, I think Riverside works on a phone. One thing about the phone, be sure again to set expectations and tell them not to talk into it like this on speaker, because you got a microphone right here. Talk into it like this thing called the phone. Back in the day, we used to talk on the phone. And this actually, I had a friend once. He was in Florida, and he was getting ready to go into a hurricane. And so he shut down all of his computer. He said, "Hey, just I'll reconnect on the app on the phone. So I'm using the phone service, not my internet service." And I was amazed. I go, "I thought you said you're going to switch to your phone." He goes, "I'm on my phone." And I go, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm holding it up to my ear." And I was really surprised how well that that kind of worked in. But it is tough if they don't have the internet. You're kind of, and if they've tried multiple systems, that's kind of step one of being a podcaster, is having access to the internet. And you might, but your guest doesn't. And that's where my buddy from Libsyn, Elsie Escobar, lives in North Carolina. And for a while, she lived in the mountains with almost no internet access. And when she recorded her podcast, she would go to a coffee place in town where she could use their Wi-Fi. So, sometimes you're like, well, okay, this isn't going to work. So you move on to something else. So, Joan, you're up.
Thanks so much, Dave. Two questions. One, you shared with us a couple of mic recommendations. Was
Yes.
that for guests or as us as hosts?
Well, if you're using a Blue Yeti, either A, learn how to use it right,
No.
or if you're using your built-in laptop microphone, yeah, those are great. But I would say, because here's the thing that always makes me scratch my head, is a guy who's written a book. I know some people like, I'm going to do a book tour on podcasts. And then they show up and think they're going to use their built-in laptop, which again, it's better than nothing, but this much better than nothing. And so I would say, hey, and this is how you explain it. Hey, you know what? I read your book and it's so amazing, but right now, and you kind of sound echoey, almost like you're in a bathroom almost. And that can be really distracting to my listeners. And I don't want them to get distracted, because I want them to be able to focus on the amazing value that you're going to get. And it kind of reflects on your brand. So, I've got great suggestions for you. This is less than $100. And of course, if you're going to be doing more interviews for your book, you buy it once, you can write it off as a business expense, and then you'll sound amazing.
But
So,
did you have a higher end recommendation for us as hosts, or you're saying those $100 ones are fine?
$100 ones are fine. If you want to go higher, you can. This is a Rode PodMic USB. It's, I think, $200. I got a $400 Shure SM7B. I'm here to tell you, there's not a lot of difference between once you get to these. There's not a lot of difference between 70 and 200. And when you go from 200 to 400, it's this difference. At that point, it's more, look at me, I have the Joe Rogan microphone. But the last time I checked, nobody can see it if it's an audio podcast. But and the other thing is, there is a reason why you'd want to switch microphones, is if you don't like the sound of your voice, then switch microphones. Because people go, why are you using this when you have a Shure SM7B behind you? And I go, I like my voice on this one better. And if you like the sound of your voice, then you're going to be more calm, more relaxed, and kind of, deliver your content better. But in the end, switching microphones is not going to, unless you sound horrible, it's not going to get you more listeners.
Great. Thank you for that. And then the second question was, I'm currently using Zoom and do have the ability to record 2 separate tracks, which is invaluable. But I'm thinking of switching to Riverside because I'm a huge Descript user. But my concern is guest userability, and that's why I've stuck with Zoom. It's just like everybody knows it, and I've heard of a lot of issues on the guest side. So what's your take on Riverside, or what would be the easiest platform for guests?
Well, hands down, Zoom is the easiest platform.
Yeah, besides Zoom, yeah.
Thank you, COVID-19. We all know how to use that. Yeah. Riverside isn't bad. I know, because I'm using a Rodecaster. Every time I join a Riverside thing, it's like, you're using a Rodecaster. Please make sure you have headphones on, which is not bad, but it reminds me about every 10 minutes. And I go, yes. I even click the I have headphones button on. So sometimes that's a little annoying. They all have somewhat of a learning curve. The good news is, all the ones we mentioned, none of them make you install software anymore, because it used to be, what was the one? I know there was, Skype obviously, but there was another one that you had to install software. You don't have to do that anymore. Okay. But none of them are super crazy. And that's where, if you can, go through yourself and take some screenshots and then send that to them, like, hey, here's how you join a meeting. Or if you have a Loom account, you haven't heard of Loom yet, it's a video tool. We use it a lot in support. You can say, hey, here's how to join, click here, do this, be sure to set this kind of thing, just to handhold them through the process.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Yep. Sheila, you're next.
Hi, Dave. Thanks. I use a Rode Podcaster and I use Rode mics. And a friend of mine, and all of mine are local, or I would say the vast majority are local. They come to my home studio. So it's a very locally focused podcast. But a friend of mine was asking about lavalier mics and was recommending that, saying that you get less reverb. Is that the case? Have you experienced?
Well, if you have the Shure, I just bought these for podcast or Podfest. They're really small. What I like about them, and for the record, any lav is not going to sound as good as one of these. They're just, they will sound listenable, but these are really, really tiny, and they go through an app. Now, these are not cheap, by the way, but they go through an app on your phone, and it has a button for like remove noise. So if there is an air conditioner in the background, it automatically removes it. There's Rode pod mics. No, sorry, that's this one. Rode, they're square. They look like you have a pager on your shirt. For those of us that remember pagers, they're all not bad. It's just a matter of they are here, and their goal is to pick up everything above you. So they are made where this mic is meant to pick up what's right in front of it. Lav mics are kind of like Rode Wireless Pro. Thank you, Marvin. They're made to kind of pick up everything because your voice is up here somewhere. So you are going to pick up a little more room noise. The advantage of, and I personally don't get this one, they're like, well, I don't want a microphone in the shot when I do my podcast. And I'm like, it's a podcast. In fact, there was one report that people said, what makes a podcast a podcast? And they said, when there's a microphone in the shot and two people are talking. And I'm like, yeah, no, but that was something that I saw. So they're handy, they're small. And that's really, I usually see them, like I'm taking these to Podfest because this fits in my pocket. I can basically walk up, clip it on somebody, hit my phone and go record and get a recording. And I usually start those things with, I'm in the hallway at Podfest because there's going to be some background noise. And some people are like, wow, I felt like I was there.
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, he said he thought I would get less reverb if I started using a lav.
I don't
rather
think so.
than I use Rode microphones and I like them, but I use Wave Pro. I don't know, maybe I'm way behind the times using Wave Pro as my editing.
I still edit when I have to pull out the scalpel to do editing. I use Sony SoundForge. Why? Because it's the first one I learned, 20 years ago. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I go through another learning curve.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. You're back.
What does it mean by copy of guest intake form on the tip?
That is the top. So good news is you made a copy of it because you don't want to edit that one. You go up to file and make a copy. Yeah. And now you could rename that. Like, what's the name of your show?
Wheel with It.
So you could say Wheel with It guest form. Okay. And then, and really you can name it whatever you want. And then what most people do is they will edit there. And then in Google, you can download as a PDF and then send that to your guest.
Okay. I have Calendly. That's what I use to schedule all my guests. Mm-hmm. And what do you get for free with Descript? Squadcast, does that integrate with Calendly pretty easy?
Well, Descript is a audio editing, actually it's a video/audio editing tool.
I know, so, I use it, but didn't you say you get Squadcast for free though?
Yeah, you get Squadcast. So if you wanted to record things where you get separate tracks, Squadcast is free when you pay for Descript. So I think Descript is, somebody help me, 32?
Yeah,
30, something like that.
I pay for it. It's like $200 a year or something.
Yeah.
So do you think Zoom is better than, or Squadcast is better than Zoom, or?
I think Squadcast is better than Zoom but it's this much better. Because again, it's not compressing the file. It's recording locally and then uploading it to Squadcast. Where Zoom, even though you can get separate tracks, it's still kind of squashing it a little bit. And that's where audio people that listen like this wait, I can hear the compression. I'm like, yeah, but I always go, remember, these are being heard through earbuds. And when in doubt, go over, sign up if they have a free trial, try one. And I've done this. I've listened to Zoom and I've listened to Squadcast and I go, and you literally have to go, yeah, I hear a difference. But if you're listening in the car, you're probably not going to hear that much of a difference. But the thing I love is you get the separate tracks, which is, I think it was Sheila mentioned or Sharon, somebody said, you can do that in Zoom as well.
I'm nervous about switching from Zoom because everybody's familiar with Zoom and I don't want anybody to have any technical issues or.
Then don't. It's your show. And if nobody's complaining about the audio, saying it's bad, don't move. It's your show.
Okay. I don't think we have enough listeners for people to complain. That's our next goal. So,
Well,
you know.
But you're doing it. That's the beautiful thing. There are a lot of people, especially in January, going, I should start a podcast, but they haven't found the courage. When the and Brad, I know you got a question. I'm going to wrap up here in a bit, but when your fear of looking silly is less than your need to serve your audience, that's when you press record, and you've done that. So that's beautiful. Brad had asked a question about the importance of pre-calls. So yeah, one way to see if a guest has decent audio and just to kind of start that whole relationship building is to do a pre-call. And so you could do that. You could say, hey, thanks so much for asking. I checked out your website. What I'd like to do, can we schedule a quick 10, 15 minute pre-call to make sure I don't waste your time? I want to make sure because I'm explaining it to them how they're going to benefit. You're going to benefit by, I don't want to waste an hour of your time. Let's get together for like 10 minutes. And then you can see if it's a good fit or not. So yeah, that's it. Let me go back here to chat. I don't edit my stuff. If I did, would never publish an episode. You should come to my talk at Podfest, where how to edit and why you should, because there are rough drafts for authors. There's preseason for athletes. There's dress rehearsals for actors, and yet you don't publish your show. But on the other hand, it's your show. Do what you want. But I think every show, Mount Rushmore was a bunch of rocks, and then somebody did some editing. Thank you guys so much for coming out. If you have any feedback, just send it to support@podpage.com. We're always open to feedback. If you're not in our Facebook group, just look for Facebook. Just look for Facebook. Yeah, look for Podpage on Facebook, because that'll be the first place where I post the replay of this. So, and then it'll be on our YouTube channel. If you look for YouTube HQ on YouTube, not only will this video be there, but about 60 other ones that we've been putting up over the last couple months. And thank you so much. Again, if you're going to be at Podfest, we're at booth 32. And thanks so much for attending. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.